What's up YouTube? Robbie Vapes back again, and today we are checking out the Vapeston Ceramika, so stay tuned. That's right YouTube, today we are checking out the Vapeston Ceramica. Now if the name Vapeston rings a bell, it probably should. They were the makers of the Magnus or the Maganus tank, depending on how you want to pronounce it. Basically this is their newest tank to market, the Ceramika. The biggest difference between the Ceramika and the Magnus are of course the coils. The coils in the Ceramika are ceramic of course, and they do claim to be able to hit 160 watts. The big question is, will it reach 160 watts? We're going to talk about how high this thing can hit at the end of the video. In the meantime, we're going to get down and dirty with it. We're going to check out how to fill it because it is quite unique, and we're also going to do the paper test, which I promise to bring into all my future tank reviews. So with that being said guys, let's just get down and dirty with the Ceramika by Vapeston and check it out. Alright guys, we are down and dirty with the Vapeston Ceramika. Let's take a quick look at the packaging before we dig in. Just a real quick look, Ceramika on the side, Vapeston, Vapeston.com, Ceramika, and Vapeston. Now I did notice that there's an S on Ceramikas. I don't know why that is, but it is labeled as Ceramikas. I'm going to go forward in calling it Ceramika just because it sounds a little bit more robust. But just note that just in case you guys want to yell at me for pronouncing it wrong. Anyways, moving on from there, we have the back. If you guys want to read this description, by all means, pause the video here. The FGCC that you're seeing so often in this back little quote here, it stands for Food Grade Ceramic Coil. Anyways, moving on to there, what do you get in the box? You get the Ceramika tank with a 0.3 ohm coil, or the 0.3 ohm FGCC coil. You also get an RBA coil, and of course you get the RBA replacement parts. And that's just parts. You don't actually get two RBAs for that. It's a little bit misleading, but you get the RBA itself and the RBA parts. Now, one thing I will say is that I actually threw out the RBA, and I'll mention that why just in just a few moments here. But basically, the RBA looks exactly like a factory coil, and unfortunately, it actually is equivalent to building on a factory coil. But again, I'll get to that later on here. We're going to remove the tank very quickly. We'll get to that later on. In the meantime, let's check out what you get in the box. So, of course, you do get the RBA head, which is just down in here. Here's a box for it, very simple box. Here's some of the accessories you get, the spare parts and things like that. You get some spare little rubber rings, you get the spare little bottom connection pin, you also get a little metal ring, you get a couple pre-made coils in there, and that's pretty much it. Now the RBA itself, like I mentioned before, I did accidentally throw it out. What I'm going to do for you guys now is just flash a quick picture of it on the screen. Alright, that was the RBA section. Moving on from there, you also get some cotton here for your RBA section if you want to use it. It does come with a couple sheets. You also have a user manual. We'll open that up very quickly. Again, if you want to read it, just feel free to pause the video at any time. You guys can read this. Flipping it over, it actually has instructions on how to rebuild the RBA section. And as you'll see in here, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit here so you guys can see it. But it's pretty much identical to building an actual coil. Now it does come with the metal rod as well, which I think I misplaced unless I missed it in the box, but it comes with the metal rod for wrapping your coils on, as you can see in this picture here. But basically, when you look at it from here, it looks identical to the factory coils. And I actually thought I threw away an old Magnus coil, but it turned out it probably was at least, the RBA section. Anyways, moving on from there, there's the instruction manual, the user manual. Like I said, just a real quick look. Let's check out the tank next. We're going to do a top fill demonstration here very shortly, but in the meantime, let's look at the tank itself. You will notice that there's actually no spare coil or factory coil in here, and there's no spare glass. That is one of the downsides I do find with this tank. I really wish it came with a spare coil and spare glass. Just one of the little things that you kind of miss out on, but it should be noted. Now, taking a look at the tank itself, we can see here we have a couple different symbols on the top here. You have a full moon and kind of like a half moon or a half circle and a full circle. The half circle is used to fill a tank. The full circle is used in vaping mode. Moving on, you also have some knurling on the airflow control ring, as we can see here. And of course, one of the things I really like about the Vapeston products is that it has this little stopper for the airflow control. So yes, you can have it all the way closed, but also the more important thing is when you're taking out the coil from here, it acts as a catch, so you're not just sitting there spinning the airflow control ring around and around instead of actually taking it off from the bottom. But here we go, guys. Let's take a quick look at this. Just very, very quick, close look. There's the chimney in there. There's where your juice is going to come in through these little juice fill holes. We've removed the coil from the base and we can now see the airflow. There is tons of airflow in this. It is great for airflow, but I do want to focus on something else in particular, and that is these juice or wicking holes. We can see how tiny they are down there. There are 4 of them. I will say, despite their size, I actually have not gotten a dry hit or a burnt hit on this yet. But again, we'll talk about that later on a little bit more just in depth, but it seems to be wicking pretty well. I am using Max VG liquid in here, so it wicks no problem. We can see the little logo, Vapeston logo down there. And then of course the writing on here, FGCC 22160 watts, and it's a 0.3 ohm coil accordingly. But again, we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. Alright, moving on to the most important section. Does the tank leak? And here are the results. This is the paper towel I left it on for 48 hours. Not just 24, but 48 hours, and this is what there is to see. We can see a little spot right here, if I can zoom in on that. And it's very difficult to see. And then there's a little spot down here, and that's where the tank itself was resting. Now I believe the little bit of juice that is on this is actually residue from the tank itself and not from leaking. I think it was on the outside of the tank. I must have missed a spot when I was trying to clean it off before I put it on here. But again, very minimal, definitely not a leaker. To show you the other side as well, there is nothing on this side. You can see the full paper towel. This was, like I said, 48 hours and no leaking, so that is a huge plus. Moving on, let's show you how to fill this tank. Now, as I mentioned before, there are 2 indicators on this tank. You have a full circle and a half circle. What we're going to do to fill it is move it to the half circle position. We can see the little dot down there to line it up. And what we're going to do is just take off the drip tip, and this is where we're going to fill it from. Now, if we look straight down into the tank, you'll notice that there is kind of a catch guard in the chimney itself. This is to prevent juice from going directly into the coil and causing leakage when you are doing filling. Now, to fill this up, it has to be on a certain angle to get the best results. And I'm actually using the Creamery Fruit Medley e-juice right now. So that's what I'm going to be using to fill this up. All we're going to do is take a couple drops of it. And what we want to do is put it on an angle. And we want the juice to go in on an angle as well. And what that's going to do is prevent it from building up. If you put it too straight up, it's actually going to start building up, create a little pocket of e-juice in there, and it's just not going to fill properly. So we're just going to slowly drip it in there, get it all in, get a little bit more juice in there. This is actually very hard to do on camera, so I apologize. And again, just keep filling it up. We've now filled the tank up. We've remembered to put it back to the full circle or the vaping mode, and we put the drip tip back on. Everything is now ready to go. What do you say we go back up top, take a couple of vapes on this thing, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the pros and cons on this tank. Alright guys, we are back up top with the Vapeston Ceramika. I have it here. Before we get to the pros and cons, I do want to mention a few quick notes, a few things I missed in the down and dirty section, and a few things I want to follow up on from the beginning of this video. First thing I want to mention is the coil itself. It's a ceramic wick with tungsten wire, and the reason why that's important is because for the longest time while using this, I thought it was actually attributing to the issues I've been having with the coil itself. What are the issues, you ask? Well, the truth is it's supposed to be a 0.3 ohm coil, but for some reason, and I think after looking at some other reviews, I have a faulty one because mine's reading at 0.7 ohms, and that's on the Wismec DNA 200, while on the Vapor Shark it's actually much more inconsistent, and it's reading at between 0.8 and 1.4. The reason for that is every single hit I take, it varies. It fluctuates so much with hit to hit. One hit can be at, say, 0.85 ohms, then the very next hit will be jump up to 1.2 ohms, 1.3 ohms, then it'll go maybe to 1.1, then I'll go to 0.9, then I'll go to 1.3. It's all over the place on my Vapor Shark DNA 200. I don't know why that is. On the Wismec, it seems to be a little bit more consistent between 0.7 to 0.8 ohms. Now, you'd think with all that jumping in the resistance that it would actually cause the coil to give off some burnt hits or to give off some burnt taste, but it's not. It's actually a very consistent hit regardless of what the coil is reading at for resistance. And the reason for that, the interesting part of this, is because it's such a high resistance coil, and again, it's not supposed to be, and from what I've seen from other reviewers, this does look to be a one-off instance, but because it's such a high resistance coil in mine, it's actually causing it to max out the voltage on all of my devices. My IPv3 Li is maxing out at 7.5 volts, my Sigelli 150TC is maxing at 7.5 volts. My Vapor Shark DNA and my Wismec, though, for some reason, and I cannot confirm if it's the coil or if it's the actual devices themselves, but for some reason, it's actually maxing out at only 6.7 to 6.8 volts, depending on the hit. What does that mean? It means I'm actually getting a consistent hit, regardless of what the resistance is at, mainly because it's actually maxed out anyways. So if one hit it might be at 35 watts, but at 1.2 ohms, and the next hit it might be at say 60 watts, but at 0.9 ohms, or whatever it might be. So that's just something to know. I think this is a one-off issue, so because of that, I originally had this recorded last night. I went through it, I didn't like how it turned out, so I'm re-recording it today to do it in my final edit, but just wanted to point that out to you guys, that is an issue. Now the tungsten wire is great, the ceramic coil is amazing, it's got great flavor, it's got a very true taste to it, and honestly every hit I take is just equally satisfying. But again, don't expect this kind of vapor production from yours if you have an actual non-faulty coil. Because if you're hitting a 0.3 ohm coil at say 60 watts, you're not going to get what I'm about to show you. So here we go guys, it's now reading at 0.69 ohms. I'm hitting it at 60 watts and we'll show you the vapor production and then we'll go talk about the pros and cons. Great vapor production, great flavor like I mentioned, but that's the hit there. It's still reading at 0.69 ohms, so that's not too bad, but again, it's just way off from what it's supposed to be, and I think that's just because I got a faulty coil. Now that we've talked about the coil, let's jump into the pros and cons, talk about the overall device, and whether or not I recommend it. So let's start with the cons. The first con for me, and it seems to be for me alone, is the fact that my coil was faulty. Whether that's going to happen to you or not, I cannot confirm or deny it, but the problem is these tanks only come with one factory coil. And that leads me to my next con. Instead of giving you two factory coils, they include an RBA deck. Now most of the time I'm actually in favor of that because it gives you the option to build your own coils, but also to have the factory coils. It gives you that choice whether or not you want to build on it or not. However, looking at the RBA deck, you will see that it's very difficult to build on, and honestly, you're better off pretty much rebuilding a factory Magnus coil than you are building on the RBA section. It's super hard to do, it's very challenging, and honestly, if you don't know what you're doing or if you've never rebuilt a factory coil before, it is going to be quite challenging, and to some of you guys, maybe even completely useless. I would have rather seen a secondary ceramic coil in there than the RBA section and have the RBA section sold separately. I know a lot of you guys are jumping on me now for hearing that because a lot of you guys often complain that the RBA section is so often sold separately, but in this case, I think it is actually a valid point. You're getting the ceramic coils, and that's the main draw of this tank. You want to have two of them. Now, in all fairness, let's move on to the pros. The ceramic coil itself, like I said before, I've been using this for over a month now, and I haven't had an issue with the coil. The flavor is still just as good as day one, and of course the hit is just as strong and just as nice as it was from the beginning. So in all honesty, you are getting a ton of lifespan out of this coil, and in fact you're getting more lifespan out of this one coil than you would in most setups where you get maybe two extra coils with it, but each coil only lasts you a week. So this is actually equivalent to buying one of those 2 or 3 spare coil setups because you're getting the same amount of life out of it, maybe even more. Like I said, I'm only a month into it, and it still feels like a clean hit. It still feels like it has that great flavor to it. So I don't know how long I'm going to run this coil for. It may last me 2 months. It may last me who knows how long. And I've been using it, and that's the thing, guys. Let's not just go by time here, because a lot of people say, well, I have a coil that lasts a month, I have a coil that lasts a week, I have a coil that lasts 3 days, etc., etc. And the truth is, the biggest selling factor to a coil's lifespan is not necessarily the amount of time that's surpassed, but the amount of tanks you've run through that coil. And for this tank in particular, I can say I've run about 2 tanks a day over the past 30 days. What does that equate to? Well, it equates to about 60 tanks in a month, or 60 refills on this coil that have been run through this coil and vaped out of. So 60 refills is a pretty big number. A lot of my tanks in the past, to give you an example, the TFE4 coils, I'm filling up 3 times a day, but it only lasts a week, so I'm only getting 21 fills out of it, give or take. This one is giving me significantly more, and at least 3 times more, as they mentioned on the box. I think it mentions like 3 to 5 times longer lifespan than an average coil, and from what I've seen so far, it is proving to be true. Anyways, we've talked enough about the coil. Let's move on to the other pros. The top fill aspect is a great pro. It is going to be a little bit challenging at first, but once you get that angle down on it when you're filling it up, as you saw me doing in the down and dirty section, it's very simple to do, and honestly guys, it's going to take no time at all. Plus you have that catch guard on the chimney to prevent it from leaking down into the coil itself or flooding the coil, so that's also a huge pro as well. Next up, we have to talk about the tank in general. How is it made? How's the craftsmanship? Everything is 304 food grade stainless steel, which is a big plus. Pyrex glass, another big plus. Honestly guys, the knurling, the machining on this device is perfect. I love it. So overall, my thoughts on this device, it's hard to really recommend it or to say stay away from it because of my faulty coil. But after watching some more reviews on this and seeing that I seem to be the one-off case which honestly is actually quite frequently the issue with me. For some reason, I just seem to get like the luck of the draw where I get the shit end of the stick, and it just seems to be my luck. But anyways, even with this coil the way it is, I actually do really like this tank. As I mentioned before, I've been using it pretty much every day for about 30 days now, and I've been running a ton of juice through it, which means I obviously like it despite the fact that the resistance on it is so inconsistent. So with that being said, guys, I do recommend this tank despite my issues, but even further than that, after watching some other reviews, I recommend it even more than that. The lifespan on the coil is great. If you're one of those people who doesn't like to spend a ton of money on coils, this is going to last you a lifetime. I mean, you get a 5-pack of these ceramic coils, and it's going to be insane the amount of life you can get out of them. I would guess that a 5-pack is going to last you at least 6 months, as long as you're not burning it too high or anything like that. And I guess that's one thing I didn't talk about, was because I was unable to max out the wattage or the recommended wattage on this tank, it's hard for me to say, yes, you can hit it at 160 watts, or no, you can't, because my coil was so inconsistent. So because I couldn't test the maximum wattage on this, it is a bit of a con for me, but at the same time, from what I've seen from other people do, they've been able to successfully take it up to about 150 watts without an issue, so that is good to know. I'm going to trust them on that. A few people who have already put out a review on this, Quest for Vape, of course, Daryl, fantastic reviewer. I trust him 100%, so if he says it can hit 150, it can hit 150. But anyways, guys, that's kind of my review on this. Hopefully you guys like it. I know I'm missing some information here between losing the RBA section and between having a faulty coil. This review has been a little bit different than what I would hope for, but hopefully it gives you an idea of whether or not this is something you want to buy yourself. Anyways, guys, that will end the video here. Thank you all for watching, and of course, as always, happy vaping, YouTube.